not too bad Wi-Fi. I'm in Seattle, as you can see from the background. Apparently, they have larger squirrels here on the internet connections than what we have way over in Spokane, Washington. And we're in the holiday season. Hopefully, we can get this show out of the way, not too badly, and one for the 29th leading up to the year 2022. And then we will be back into Spokane and continuing accordingly. For those of you who are around or not living in a cave, to know that I have been going after replacing Darwin, Nathaniel Jensen's little book, where he hopes to replace Darwin. Not a gigantic work. There's only a few hundred sources in it, and that he tends to misrepresent stuff that's scientific. He doesn't really work out in too great a detail what he thinks his model is. It's a mess. So, and we'll have a part 2 on brood parasitism and how creationists have attempted to deny that little puppy. That's an interesting selection of papers. So first, let me thank my patrons. There we go. Our patrons for the project. Without you, it would be much harder to be able to pull this sort of thing. And I relish all of your support. Our colleagues, Hendrel Colton, who is responsible for the Wi-Fi, Eric Raleigh, Suris and Zeshi, researchers, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Meal, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Paulogia, Ralph Pledger, Benjamin Simpson, Salava, Speed of Sound and Studio Damwing, our assistant researcher level command cyborg, Doraku, Jelly, the Lavender Lady, Totus Real, Christopher Johansson, our friends Antoine Botts, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Daniel. Insects are cool, aren't they though? Nana, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffaluffagus, Bo Hulborough, Rasmussen, Devin Reeves, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and I will continue to thank our legacy patrons, Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Staggle, Sun, Skystone, Ugly German Truths, Everett, and Sewer. All of you are much appreciated. You have made the difference between scraping by and being able to afford ink and all the fun little games that's going on. The Jensen chapter that I've been dealing with for the past few weeks, months, is the one where he's kind of presenting his claims to document the idea that mitochondrial mutation rates and other mutation rates are consistent with an extremely young Earth origin for various organisms. And he has not been going out of his way to present that in terms of the actual technical detail. There would be barrage footnotes where he would be just dropping a pile of technical citations like this helps his case any. And the next one that took the case up, it relates to nematodes and their tendency to go dormant, diapause, I think it's called. This related to the issue of where you would have presumably a mutation rate might be in terms of how old the species was or how long it had been going on, would be contingent upon whether or not the organism goes into a dormant state and doesn't reproduce as quickly and so forth and so on. Not that that's necessarily helping his creationist position, but he lists 2 papers. Fortunately, both of them available in open access. There's a 2015 paper on one particular aspect of nematodes, and it explicitly discusses how they evolved from a conventionally sexually reproducing ancestor. There was another paper from 2015 on fruit flies, also about their diapause technique. That Jensen cited, which noted that they had moved out of Africa 10 to 15,000 years ago. So there's a biogeographical aspect to all of it. And both papers had explicit genealogy lineage issues that were laid out as to what organisms were related to what. Jensen would have needed to have presented, did he agree with that characterization and was simply trying to scrunch them up together in a type chronology, or was he disputing them? What's his model? And we don't get that. So simply presenting these technical papers as if they were automatically in favor of his side, and that the information in there we were not supposed to take note of. They're really quite nice. One of them is basically kind of a summary paper, and other one is on more of the technical details of that diapause issue with nematodes, both in eLife, the eLife Sciences online journal. This procedure that Jensen's been doing has been very consistent. The previous source analysis that I had done on Roop and Sanford, they actually had a bigger collection of technical articles, and they also made use of an awful lot of authority quoting. Jensen doesn't really deal with that authority quoting much, but he does dangle technical literature that's sometimes very dated, so where he's not dealing with more recent material, or in this case, bringing up topics as if they relate to his side without presenting what his model is. And is there any wonder that Jensen's position has not actually gained any traction, although it's likely to be favored by other creationists simply because they're about the only game in town and they can hope that it can actually work. Others I've alluded to in previous episodes, Dan Stern Cardinale and others had gone through the genetics of Jensen, and it just doesn't pass muster. So he needs to have, he has a pretty high bar that he needs to present in order to be able to make an argument that any of the subjects or any of the technical papers that he's bringing up can be justified to use for the purposes that he intends to use them. And simply dangling them, dripping them in a footnote, isn't helping matters any. So long as we're bouncing back and forth between 5 and 10 on the index here. So I'll just kind of proceed as quickly as possible to get a lot of these little points underway. And of course, I'll be sticking up all of the links to the various papers once the video finalizes, although I probably won't be able to get around to that until I get back to Spokane after vacation and into the new year. But anyway, part 2 is the one that's got a pile of information on it. And it has to do with a 2020 posting at creation.com by John Alquist, who thought to bring up brood parasitism. This is where the classic example is the cuckoo that lays its eggs in the nests of a parasite bird that it's parasitizing, and the bird doesn't notice and ends up feeding the new chick from the cuckoo as if it were its own. And in some cases, the cuckoo, the little chick will actually toss any unhatched eggs out. And so the cuckoo is able to brood without maintenance of having to actually build a nest itself. This is kind of a creepy thing to occur in nature, but instead of Alquist having qualms about this from a design perspective, he insists, quote, "Evolutionists have no idea of the origin of brood parasitism. Their speculations and just so stories simply do not make a plausible account." And did he offer sources for the supposedly inadequate evolutionary position on this? No. And so we have no idea what he was talking about on this. And the reason why I just thought to bring it up has to do with the fact that brood parasitism is a really well understood phenomenon. And there's been a huge amount of work on what kind of species are more prone to it than others. For example, birds that nest in huge flocks, there's no example of brood parasitism known from them because birds have to be really attentive to the exact chick that they raise and that they know when something fishy is going on. So you find you'd have to have a species where the bird just is living in a nest. Why would the egg not be theirs? They just don't have the software going on in their heads to cause them to be concerned about this. And this is still a relatively rare phenomenon. Most of the examples are from birds, although there's also an example that's popped up with cichlid fish, cichlid fish from 2018 that I'll be putting a link to. That's from Science Advances. But most of the stuff that's been on birds. And just a sampling that I'm going to be putting up as links. We've got a 2003 paper from Sorensen on brood parasitism in indigo birds. We've got a paper from 2010 from Shizuka and Lyon that goes into how birds use, coots use hatch order to learn to recognize and reject conspecific brood parasitism. In other words, how the dynamics of how particular species can avoid being parasitized this way. And then a 2013 paper from Feeney et al. On brood parasitism, brood parasitism and the evolution of cooperative breeding in birds. So all of this dynamic as to why these things occur, why cooperative breeding might originate as a way to compensate for these sorts of things, all of this is immensely detailed. And Claire Spottiswoode and her colleagues are particularly notable in having been working on this for years and years and years. There's a PNAS paper from them from 2010. There's another one from 2011, and then a review that Spottiswoode did in 2013, which pulls together the various work that they've been doing and the various conclusions that they've drawn from it. All of which suggests that our creationists' position on this was unjustified. And if you take the case that the various arguments and explanations and details and the bits about why certain species do it and certain ones don't, that there was some flaw in that, and also from a creationist point of view, why a designer would have designed this to happen. But did God dislike particular species? Did Satan decide to be given dominion over cuckoos? I mean, what exactly is their position to contrast with the supposedly inadequate evolutionary one? By the way, if there are people watching, I'm not getting any chat overlay on this. Let me try again to see whether or not we're getting anything. So it either hasn't, let's see if I'm getting a connection on here. And yeah, it's coming through from my end, so it's very possible that everyone is out preparing for holiday festivities, and so the last thing they have on their mind is watching RJ bump up and down in the video context. So this may be a relatively truncated show on this. Jackson isn't available, so I kind of give you a preface on what I've been doing in regards to the second Rocks book. Spent the last, once I got back onto a workable internet, catching up on a huge backlog of the various online information from the Discovery Institute, CMI, and the Answers in Genesis, and even elements from Religion Dispatches and Jerry Coyne and others that it amounted to some 800 different works that were coming in from various email accounts that needed to be followed up on and triaged as to some stuff that was relating to the new book and some of them relating to further projects and all that. So finally, I've gotten kind of caught up. And that's been very, very helpful because there is a mountain of information that pops up in these little areas. I'll be alluding next week to one of those things that did pop up in this new research area, the weird case of this anti-evolutionist Boomer who had wanted to deliver an anti-evolution lecture at a teachers' conference and got pulled. And he was screaming bloody murder, and there were the intelligent designers were talking about this was the Darwinian Gestapo. I mean, it was all extreme hyperbole. And we'll be going into all of that on next week's episode. Any response on the chat? So I'm assuming that nobody is watching from the thing live. Anybody that later on that comes in and catches the episode after the fact, definitely feel free to comment and all of that, see what's going on there. So otherwise, I would have been having questions incoming on it. The new Rocks book will be dealing with cosmology issues. We'll be dealing with human evolution. It'll be the origin of vertebrates and Tiktaalik in that example. It'll have sections on the Darwinian racism issue. That's a canard that occurs. And we'll also be having an introductory chapter that's going to be catching you up to speed for technical literature that was related to the various topics that was in Volume 1. So it'll act as a supplement. Jay, hello, there is somebody there. Hi, Jay. Yes, I was wondering whether or not there was anyone in the live stream or not. If you've caught the show up to where I'm starting, I was mentioning nematode worms and the diapause dormancy issue and how Jensen doesn't attempt to connect this up with his own arguments of design. And then the delightful issue of brood parasitism from the creationism movement. So that's all of those will be links that I'll be putting on. And if you have any questions or comments at the moment, you're the only one in the feed. So you have absolute power there, Jay. Any questions, anything that's been nagging your mind on creation evolution issues or anything? We have Answers in Atheists. Hello. Aha, yes, dear old. It looks like the avatar, possibly of Mike. I'm not sure. Um, anyway, we've toss away questions because it looks like we've got moderately good Wi-Fi connection knocking around in here. So if anything's been piling up unanswered from previous episodes, let me know so we can kind of get caught up on that. My dear sponsor. Yes, I thought that was you, Mike. Yeah, it looked like that was the familiar thing I've been trying to catch your videos and things now that I've been on a position where I can actually catch videos and that a little bit easier. Ian Chen had a debate ways back he's planning on having a debate with Kent Hovind, but Hovind backed out at the last minute, so he ended up having a strange interaction with Tangelo on whether or not evolution or creationism had more or less of a deleterious effect on science. Hello, Brian. There we go. So we got a bunch of people there. Hi, Mike and Brian. Yay. Let's make this an impromptu Q&A thing. What's on your minds? What interesting things that pop up as to topics or unresolved issues or whatever that may be occurring on there, because we got a big world out there. I just got my booster shot for that particular disease that's wandering around in there to keep the virus at bay. I'm generally impervious to viruses anyway, but I'm a public spirited citizen, so we deal with that kind of a thing. And yes, the connection. Oh, hi, Lamont. Yes, we got a pile up with we're getting more and more people. Yeah, I've been running at anywhere between 5 and 10 connections, and I think it's probably because Seattle has a much bigger network that's able to connect up on it than poor lowly little Spokane. And the weird ocelli on top of their heads. Oh, yeah, to stream in a little bit on stink bugs. Yeah, the insects are one of those. Everybody in our network that is in fact a bug guy. Keep a close tabs on all of the various connections in relation to technical papers and other issues, because every bit of that is relevant to the creation evolution issue as to how much of the work is in fact being done by evolutionists, not creationists. You get somebody peripherally like Beckley over in the intelligent design movement that's from the insect systematics angle, and yet it doesn't really have an intelligent design model to apply to it. So that's a really good question. That issue is one. There's such a huge field. The young Earth creationists are in a quandary because they can't quite figure out whether or not they should have insects on the ark or not. And some of them are problematic enough in terms of things that can't dog paddle during a flood that they would really have to have them on the ark. And others, they just hope that they can somehow survive, and then when the water disappears, pick up all their little livelihood as if absolutely nothing had happened. And that's a inherent problem for the young Earth creationists. Move over to creationism and intelligent design, and they just don't think about it. So insects are just this big blob that's happened in the past, and they don't really bother about it. Yes, that's a wise comment, Lamont. Yes, although it is not a case where I've had to worry about that. Apparently, there's a program. Ooh, what do they do with the baraminology of insects? Yeah, that's there's very little on it in the creationism literature. First of all, there's a ton of insects, and creationists can't even decide amongst themselves whether they allow insects on the ark at all. And the same thing with fish. You've got freshwater fish that don't really do well in a saline environment, or if the saline environment during the flood drops below a certain level, the saltwater fish are in trouble. But insects, my gosh, you've got hundreds of thousands of species of beetles. You have a vast array of things that would have to be accounted for in the design scenario. And most of these, remember, were not known to the people who wrote the Bible. And so it literally was just on their scope. And the people that have followed up since don't do any a bit on it. So everybody that does, in fact, have a yes, that they would honestly address what had to be on the ark, we would be shutting up. Yeah. It's also a useful mechanism for understanding the various standard science, because when you pick up a particular subject, that's why I recommend that anybody that's whose interest is already insect evolution and insect origins, keep an eye on the back as to think about how could an anti-evolutionist explain these data. And you might want to go ahead and do a video on posting if you have a website, call attention to it. And whatever taxa you might be interested in, just as I do with the Jensen material, find out whether a particular topic has ever come up anywhere in the anti-evolution literature. So you can Google for a particular technical paper, you can Google for the topic, you can put in creationism and design, you can put in various tags in how you search through the thing and see whether anybody has done anything on it at all. And odds are that most of the technical papers that you're bumping into won't be discussed at all anywhere. But if they are, that's an opportunity to actually go in and do the same sort of thing on that as I am doing on this. It's say, oh, this is what the technical paper is, and here is what this anti-evolutionist is claiming about it, and now let's compare the two. Especially focusing on things that are, as I try to do here, that are open access. And that way you don't have to take our word for anything. We don't want you to take our word for anything. No. We want you to look up the original papers and decide for yourself. Plus you learn shit. And that's what I think is so neat about it. Yeah, the ants are an intriguing group because they've been around for a couple 100 million years. They were certainly getting busy bees at the time of the dinosaurs. In terms of body mass, the last number that I've heard is that the mass of ants on the planet is roughly equivalent to the mass of humans. And as anybody that, like, I have a big ant nest that lives out underneath my lawn, little itty bitty tiny little ants that come out to sun during the good weather. They will burrow an exit route, and it usually varies along the sidewalk as to where they want to come out. And you'll see this black, dark, seething mass of a zillion little ants out there, presumably doing their little sunning things, and then they come back down into their nest down below. Then they don't get in the house or anything like that. But still, they're immensely resilient and fascinating creatures. For those of you who want to know some stuff on ants, it pops up in my old Evolution Slam Dunk book. That's in links that I always put in the bits, so anybody can zap and pick up the hard copy of it. I would be waving a copy of it or pointing to it over my shoulder if I were here in Spokane, because that whole issue about how Michael Denton, the intelligent design guy, tried to defuse ants. He's a chemist, by the way. And we go into metapleural glands and all the little diagnostic features about things, and the spheca that are the ancestral groups that are the wasp ants that are at the very base of development of ants and all that. It's an absolutely delicious subject matter. And so anybody that has an insect interest, make a point of keeping track of the technical literature and what. Oh, Jackson is here after all. Welcome, sir. Let's get you.
Me.
Yes. Let's flip back over here so we can see. Hopefully, we can see your face in here, because all we're getting is, or at least your little avatar J. I'm not worried. Okay, I'm not getting a secondary image on that. But at any rate, fill us up to speed, sir, about what you've been doing and how things are going on here. Did you catch any of the first of part of the show, or do I need to give you a reprise as to what I've been talking about for topics?
You can absolutely give me a reprise. I did not. I just got here.
Yeah. Jensen, I'm continuing that section where I'm going through his footnotes, where he's trying to lay out the basis for manipulating the mitochondria data to fit the 6,000-year time frame. And he's now bringing up diapause in nematode worms and also in fruit flies to suggest that allows, which it should presumably, an indication of whether you can use mitochondrial DNA mutation rates spread over time if there's dormancy and all that, and reproduction rates and all the rest. But he cited two papers that are actually very interesting works, and they contain information that he never brings up. They're just the papers are just buried in a footnote. Both of them from 2015, both of them from the eLife journal. One of them, which explicitly talks about how that particular taxon they were discussing had developed from a sexually reproducing ancestor. They got really funky sex lives amongst this little group. And another one, the 2015 Markow paper, discusses the movement of fruit flies out of Africa 10 to 15,000 years ago, which is before the creation of the Earth, in Jensen's time frame. And both of them have detailed phylogenies for the taxa that they're dealing with. And so the issue that I was raising is, does Jensen disagree with that? Does he argue that things aren't related or not? What is his position? But he doesn't get to any of that. There's none of the contents he'd use. He's just alluding to them as little barrage footnotes. And so I'm filing them in my analysis in the spreadsheet as misrepresentations of sources. Because if you're going to bring up that data, you should be dealing with it. You should offer some commentary. And he's got these long, sometimes useless explanatory footnotes in there, including stuff on scripture. The last couple of weeks, you may have spotted about that long string of stuff he had dangling creationist material on geology. That was bad to begin with. Use your space better, kid. Use your space better. Then part two is one that I thought would find particularly amusing, because in 2020, this creationist John Alquist at creation.com decided to bring up brood parasitism.
We discussed him, right?
I think he's popped in various contexts, but anyway, this one was about brood parasitism, and he boldly asserted, quote, "Evolutionists have no idea of the origin of brood parasitism. Their speculations and just so stories simply do not make a plausible account." And guess how many sources he cited for that?
0.
Exactement.
I mean, like, what? That's bogus. We have
loony.
Like the birds that are parasitized more often are better able to discern their eggs.
Yeah. Like, and so that my jaw dropped when I read that. And so I culled a bunch of delicious little papers from 2003 Sorensen, and a 2010 paper and a 2013 paper, and a bunch of stuff from Claire Spottiswoode, who's done a huge amount of work in her team on this for years, that I'm going to be putting the links up to point out that it sure looks like they understand the subject really well.
That's bonkers. What the heck?
Yeah. And you get this sort of thing, and you have to wonder, the poor reader of Creation Ministries International, if they read this, they get a lot of very adamant foot stamping certainty on these shows. But if they don't even bother with references, that's insulating them from any accidental chance. At least Jensen theoretically presents material. And some of these ones do actually offer footnotes now and then. Another thing that's kind of relevant, it popped up in a completely different subject matter. I was catching up on a lot of backlog notes. I had like 800 emails that I had in my backlog references to stuff.
That's a couple.
That's a couple, yes. And it took me last month or so to trim them back, because they were all linkages to assertions that were coming from the Family Research Council, from Jerry Coyne's postings, from stuff at Religion Dispatches, from material from stuff from the ICR, stuff from Discovery Institute, that were making various assertions on various topics, all of them related to material that we will be discussing in one or the other books that we're co-authoring down the line. So I wanted to get them whipped up into shape. But one thing that anybody that comes into this area can tell is the squeaky wheel hypothesis, that you can tell what doesn't really interest them if the posting is really short and is relatively citation free. So that bit from Alquist is an example of that. It's quite compact, and it has virtually no documentation and nothing specifically on the point that he's bringing up. You look at another one, there was a posting that I was just diving into in relation to some creationists at Family Research Council complaining about what's terrible and at CMI, there was another posting specifically on abortion. That
Of course.
thing is multiple pages long with 60 some odd footnotes in it to technical literature. Suddenly, they are just verbose and with supposed references. And I've already spotted in some other examples of how they are misrepresenting the source material. That was the case with the Family Research Council thing that I was looking into. And I suspect I'm going to see exactly the same thing with the CMI posting, but that'll be one that'll be left to a farther book down the road to go through and track down all the original source material. But that means that the source methods approach is universally applicable to anything. And you can see from the metastructure of stuff. I'm sure you've noticed this in your own postings that and investigating stuff for the various videos that you've done, that to tell the difference between a creationist doing a side swipe on a topic versus one that they're really obsessive about, and you've got a lot of stuff in there. Yeah, doesn't mean that they're going to be right, but at least they're paying attention to it.
It's if it's just kind of something they don't really care about, they'll just be like, oh, that was made on day 4 or whatever, and that'll be kind of it.
Or allude to
it's too complicated.
Work. You get an awful lot of recycling. One of the things that stuck out like a sore thumb on a lot of these Creation Ministries International postings that I was looking into is how many of them were reprises of really old stuff. So you'd get this 2021 email proudly linking to a 2007 creationism post on a subject matter that, like, there has been no science work in the last 15 years.
No, apparently not.
Apparently not, yeah. And so that's all
not in their world.
Not well, yeah. Well, and yeah. And that's why it's always kind of interesting to take a look at that kind of meta level to find out why are they going to all the trouble of bringing out an old work. They bring up a particular topic. I'm trying to think of the one that really struck me because they made a point of referring back to, I think, of a Brian Thomas thing from like 2013 on a topic where there's been lots of work since then. And therefore, why would you go to the trouble of pointing to a thing that by the very nature of stuff is obsolete? Why would you even bother? And the answer is that they don't care about the content.
They don't know, don't care.
Yeah. And next week, I hope you can be on hand for next Wednesday, the 29th, because I stumbled. One of the things that I encountered related to this guy, Bouma, Herman Bouma, which I'm sure you've never heard of.
Okay.
He is a lawyer. Oh, why are there so many lawyers? Very conservative religious guy who tried to have a speech at a teachers conference in 2019, and at the very last minute, the authorities came in and said, "Excuse me, but we've heard this is actually a religious thing that you're trying to do here, and so we're pulling the plug." And he went ballistic, and the intelligent design movement, Casey Luskin and others were fuming about the Darwinian Gestapo. And Jerry Bergman has just put a post up on the Darwinian Gestapo, repeating all of this stuff. And what was interesting is that Bouma has a website that he started back in 1998. And I looked to what was on it, which is not much. And it includes Richard Milton's anti-evolution book, and of course your obligatory Denton and he, and all that stuff, and of pandas and people.
Of course.
Yeah.
The classic.
Yeah. And that was basically it for references. But what really got fun is at his website, he posted basically the paper that he was planning on giving, or at least a form of it, because it's actually dated 2021. And I'll be putting links up to all of that stuff. So I was, and there's not a single source in it, by the way. It's basically a pile of Darwin quotes, on how Darwin was reacting to his critics and implying that there's been no new information since. So all of the objections that were being raised against Darwin in 1880 are still valid today.
Of course,
Well,
no work has been done, obviously.
No work at all whatsoever. Well, he also, bless him, just did a thing at his church in, I think, Virginia or somewhere. And he posted a link to that on, there was a link posted, Lutheran church it was. And here you actually get to see him doing his little presentation. And some of the things, I did a little side chat in on Twitter and our little thing where you didn't know, did you, that Alfred Wallace gave up the idea of natural selection in 1869?
Because it didn't happen?
Because, exactly. And so it's clear that Booma really doesn't know much about the topics he's talking about. And that he's
that's like the Lady Hope story.
Yeah. And he clearly has a religious motivation. But to be fair, there was no real discussion of God in the presentation that he was going to be giving at that teachers' conference. But the moment you looked at his website, he's got an axe to grind as to why he's picking the examples that he is. And so next week that we'll have a little bit more on that. I think I put the linkages up on Twitter for people to take a look at as a preemptive strike on that one, because it is just delicious to look at what he was bringing up, the fossil record and the
Cambrian explosion.
And the Cambrian explosion. Yes, that got brought up as well.
Yep.
I mean, it was all the golden oldies hits, but so many of the examples have had work since, like on baleen whales and the like. I mean, it's not 1880 anymore, kids.
It's not. What?
And so all of the hyperbole. Well, another interesting thing that struck me about this Booma example is that of the various people that brought up Booma, it was all just about the controversy of him not being allowed to speak. None of them tried to discuss the content other than Jerry Bergman. And Bergman shot his mouth off on it. He actually brought up a few of the individual examples without sources, by the way. So just lathering on the daisy chain on this. We'll see whether or not that this has any legs or not, but I know I'll be alluding to it in the future Culture Camp book on the all the cause celebs about the various people that have been assailed as being suppressed by the Darwinian conspiracy thing. Anybody that looks in tip 1.7 on my website, party like it's $14.99. Tip 1.7 is the one you want to look up at my website that covers quite a few of these cause celeb examples of young recreationists who figured in the Dover trial, and there were various teachers that virtually earth creationists masquerading as intelligent design. And Casey Luskin and others would talk about them as if they weren't young earth creationists. And so there's the truth in labeling issue is that I have no problem with somebody with a creationist perspective having their opinions. They're wrong, but fine and dandy. But the ones that want to be stealthy and to put a label on them that's not actually applicable, and they want to kind of slip under the radar that way, I find that very scurrilous. I mean, say what you think and be honest about it. Don't try to wriggle around it. And hi, BJ and Brian. We got some other people in the feed on here. We've been going on fairly good signal here. I think the variable is that Seattle has just got a way better Wi-Fi network system than we have over in Spokane. So I guess it's because we have like steam powered ones or powered by little gerbils in hamster wheels. I'm not sure what our problem is over there.
Well, it could be the creationists and the wires.
Exactly, that's an entire thing on there, and so I'm hot at work on coordinating all the stuff for the new Rocks book, and plugging all the little sidebars on that. I think I'm loving the material that's coming downstream on this, and to make sure that it's as up to date as possible. And I know that you'll be doing the same thing on the chapters on your end, and we're going to have a juicy second volume.
Oh yeah.
What's so neat about it is that the science just never stops coming in. That's what's so neat about it, and the idea of trying to get a good representative flavor of all that incoming along the way. It's tough to keep up at times because there's just such a flood of material. The cosmology issue is going to be a delicious one. We got a little thing there. RJ, if you get a better internet, you got to join Jackson on the 15th to talk about our egg-laying cousins, monotremes. Ah, yes, indeed. Yeah, hopefully we'll. Although I'll be back in Spokane by that time, and so cross fingers, we'll see what it is on there. At least I can be in the live chat part in that, if that works out. We'll play it as it airs. It's funky that the monotremes, of course, you would think would be an awkward card to play because there's only a couple of them, and the fossil record is limited. But you still got a huge amount of material on their developmental biology and their genetics, and they've, I think, recently done the platypus genome, and I think, haven't they done the echidna one as well?
It's possible. I'm not super familiar.
I'm pretty sure they've got a full platypus gene.
I wouldn't be surprised, though. I'll say that.
And so all of that, whenever they get that full genome, now they can start looking around at the bargain, the little details of stuff. And did you happen to catch the Dapper Dino, Atheist Jr. and Dan Stern Cardinale going through Kent Hovind's genetic video?
Oh God, no!
It's a shorty.
Dapper yesterday.
It's only like 17 minutes because that, but it's basically the golden oldies of all the stupid that's in Kent Hovind's college course.
There's a lot of stupid
on genetics, including the idea that the nucleotides rungs of the DNA ladder are genes.
Oh, I saw them posting about that yesterday, but no, I didn't watch the video.
Oh God, it was really hilarious because poor Dan. Dan, first of all, the first one got a face palm like this, and then a double face palm for some of the later stuff. And then Dan crawls over into a corner and curls up in fetal position at one point.
You know what? That actually makes perfect sense. So yeah.
Yeah, that was his, because it was like, oh, how can anybody make these kind of claims? It's just digging the hole, because the idea that in Kant's view, each chromosome has all the genetic information to build an entire organism.
And he expected these to be for like college students somehow?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Now you have to remember the network that he connects up to. Phyllis Schlafly is dead now, so that's not part of it anymore. But when she was alive, she, back in 2004, was actively pushing Kent Hovind's science courses. So what you get are anybody that wants to dive into this kind of issue can look to see whether anybody is actually playing off of this. I'm not entirely sure Kent's market penetration on these college courses that even any typical. I don't think he could pass muster at Liberty University, for example. I would be absolutely gobsmacked if anybody other than homeschoolers would be paying any attention whatsoever to any of Kent Hovind's literature. So anybody that's watching,
God help those poor kids.
Yeah, that has any connections on this, I'd seriously love to know, because I haven't seen any instances of even lower echelon religious schools actually using any of Kent's stuff, any of it, let alone the college level material. I think functionally all of these things are just videos that he's trying to make money and sell on, and that homeschoolers and various people of that stripe would be using. Now, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me that somebody who was a teacher, even in a public school context, because he's had penetration where he would be going around to Maybe that's the worst word to use for Kent Hovind.
Yeah,
But
not
yeah,
great.
I mean, interaction. Let's be a little bit more politic. Anyway, but he would be invited in over various years, back before his jail time, certainly, that he would come in and do lectures at various high school students. I don't think there were any college examples. That he would be delivering his spiel. So it's entirely possible that a teacher that would be like-minded, that would invite him to come into town and have the discussion on that, might, open up the coat and say, "Oh, here's the college video from Mr. Hovind, Dr. Hovind." That might have happened.
Yeah.
But if anybody has any examples of that in their own schooling or any kind of thing where Hovind has popped up in any context whatsoever, where people are actually drawing on the stuff, and because most of his stuff is video, it would be linkages to videos or stuff that was making the rounds in the old days through VHS tapes and all that. That's how he made his rounds in the pre-DVD streaming era. Anyway, I'm very more. PragerU, the discussion up in
I
there.
doubt it.
It's
They're
all
more
economy.
intelligent design anyway.
Yeah, they wouldn't be dealing with young Earth creationism. They stick to the Steve Meyer Discovery Institute thing, and by and large, if anybody uses Discovery Institute stuff, they tend to stay highly in-house. They don't veer outside of that. Now, you get a slightly different dynamic over in young Earth creationism material, either AIG and CMI and IC, where they will dibble-dabble occasionally with intelligent design postings when convenient, just like Jerry Bergman alluding to the Booma case. And Behe, because he's so prominent in the in irreducible complexity claptrap and all of that, they really can't avoid to discuss him. But they'll usually put little footnotes in. By the way, he's not a young Earth creationist, and we lament and hope that someday he may come to his senses and all that kind of stuff. But Kent Hovind is so far off the field that who uses him other than people who watch the videos? And so it's a genuine matter of historical interest. If anybody knows of recent examples in, say, the last 10 years, since he got out of jail, effectively that period, to where he's doing anything. In the old days, he lectured a lot, traveled all over the place, although how much in reality, it's hard to say. Supposedly he gave, like, in one point, he's in his doctoral dissertation, he was saying that he gave like 400 speeches a year. Well, that's more than one a day.
Yeah, that's kind of impressive.
If he's not lecturing on the Sabbath, that means a lot more than one a day during the week. And it's possible that he's, hitting a couple ones in the same town on the same day. That's theoretically interesting. But
RJ, I was on Dapper's channel yesterday, and we were reading Hovind's thesis.
Quote. You were lured into that too. Isn't that fun? You poor little.
It's so bad. There's like barely. Whenever they take a drink, whenever he gets something right, which is not very often.
Everybody who is interested in this topic and can stomach it should probably take a look at Hovind's dissertation just to get it in their head that
it's like
he
100
thinks
pages.
that was a dissertation.
It starts with "Hello, my name is."
Yeah. Well, just structurally, it's juvenile, that sort of thing. And remember, it's not from an accredited college, but even beyond that, he's kind of edited it over the years, so it's uncertain. It looks like the version you're using maybe dates to the early 1990s, but it contains all the standards of 1980s creation, minus much in the way of documentation, as was spotted in the first section I saw, and then I'm sure you're encountering in the section that you are. He's not exactly a font of citation.
No, he's cited like 2 things so far. And I don't think either of them were super relevant. So, and they weren't correctly cited either.
No one will ever accuse Kent Hovind of being a bookworm. That the most that he can be accused of in the video lectures is that he parasitizes other creationists, and it's often Walt Brown. That's his go-to. I've documented the case that he did with Harun Yahya and the bird evolution thing, and other stuff that's gleaned from who knows where young Earth creationist sources once we've gotten into the internet era. But so long as he's just copying somebody else's stupid, he's kind of anchored at their level of stupid. But we know that when he starts thinking for himself, he starts really running off the rails because he's an idiot. And so it's always fun to see that. And you're seeing all that in distilled form in those rambling, run-on, get-to-the-point Kent paragraphs in the dissertation.
Yeah, no, it's just bonkers.
Yeah. And I'm old enough to remember a time before Kent Hovind was known to anybody. So he was starting to trickle into the field. If you look at the field in 1995 even, Hovind was practically invisible at that time. I was discovering that he was out there, and he was building up a huge network of little acolytes all over the place that would ultimately bear fruit in an awful lot of grassroots context, because at that time, because of the video networks where he was doing lectures and they were passing them around, and people would buy the video or make a copy of it and pass it around other areas, so you get copies of copies of copies. All of this changed for the worse when things could be just posted online. And so you could get vintage Kent Hovind all over the place that would be accessible to however many people have access to YouTube. So it emphasized. But nobody in the regular young Earth creationism community was paying any attention to him, and still don't. And he's just kind of a peripheral annoyance. I think 1997, Sarfati and a few others basically dumped on Kent Hovind as writing bad pseudoscience and bad scripture. And boy, how far off the field can you have to be in order to the ire of the ICR and AIG for being scripturally incompetent?
Right.
So it's really a funky thing. And yet, at the grassroots level, I bump into Hovindistas all the time.
Oh, and, absolutely.
I
ran into one today.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're all over the place. And in the case of a high school student, this was maybe about, 10 years ago in Spokane. He had clearly seen videos of Hovind, and an awful lot of them will be following the stuff that they see online. And now, of course, that he's got his little sock puppet, Matt Powell, together. Don't they make a couple? A couple of what? I'm not sure, but still. They in their little matching shirts, and it's just so precious.
You just gotta feel bad for that kid at some point.
Well, I suspect that Kent wants a successor, and he doesn't have Eric, because Eric walked off with the material and has now joined himself parasitically to AIG and that crowd. Yeah. And he sees a higher calling. I mean, AIG has got moolah. Whereas Kent Hovind is operating at a bargain basement level, basically volunteer things. I mean, is he much only slightly beyond the level I'm operating at financially? It's not like even ICR is kind of second stringers compared to AIG. They've got money enough to build theme parks and all of that. Although ICR can still send out free copies of Acts and Facts, a little bit of things going around. A lot of their financing would be dark money, people who are presumably well-heeled and able to underwrite stuff. And because this stuff is not publicly disclosed, it's difficult to pare out what the heck is going on in here. I'm not sure what the circumstances are of CMI. They've got a certain amount of crossover between ICR, AIG, and CMI for some of their writers and that. But as to how many people are actually kind of the core underwriters of them, I'm inclined to think CMI is fairly peripheral compared to the bankroll at AIG.
Yeah, you
And
definitely
especially
see
because
fewer articles cited at them,
Yeah. And then, of course, you got the asterisks that are still there. Creation Research Society quarterly, that still does articles every once in a while. They still do their little thing, but there is things where the only time I really encounter them is if they happen to be cited somewhere along the way in relation to some little technical issue. Just looking at from a scholarly area, the two heavy hitters are the ICR Acts and Facts crowd and the Answers in Genesis bunch. Although we're still talking a really small number of people, it's only about 50 that are the active drivers on there. Oh, yes. Oh, snark, BJ. Hubbard being taken over by Miscavige. Oh, my. Yes, Matt Powell is Kent's new kid. Isn't that tragic for one or the other or both of them? I'm not entirely sure which.
I don't know. I feel bad for him because he is clearly just brainwashed. Like, he has no thoughts at all. And I'm pretty sure that's a product of his upbringing, at least in part.
Yeah. Well, he's a fairly. They would certainly have a comparable bigotry. All the material that they would feel about homosexuality and abortion and all of that culture camp obsessions, and probably extreme right-wing politics. We know the diatribes that Kent Hovind has fumed over the years on such things. Matt has, I haven't seen stuff directly from him on that, but it's entirely possible that he has shot his mouth off on a lot of these other little things. Take a look at that. Scientology is the creepy gift that keeps on giving. Just if you want to think that Answers in Genesis and that is at the Mount Olympus level of wacky, creepy. No, the Scientologists were there first. And they functionally are just a big money-making operation pretending to be a religion. Whereas I think most of the people that are involved in the creationism movements actually do have convictions. They're idiots and Tortugans, but they actually believe what they think. We'll find out in future as time goes by, because Kent Hovind's about the same age I am, and so neither one of us are immortal. So at some stage, if he has this evangelical need to keep the ministry going, well, it looks like Matt Powell is being groomed as the successor, and whether or not it's going to degenerate into a free-for-all after that, and at least poor little Eric Hovind has got his battleship apologetics out there that he can trot out the heavy guns from the big leagues that's got money. And I don't think Kent or Matt is ever going to pull that little trick off. They're at best, they are merely repeating claptrap that's coming from the big guns. So why do we need a secondary redactor? And baggage enough walking around. If Matt's theology is anywhere near Kent Hovind's, he's going to be just as unacceptable to AIG and ICR as Kent was. So I don't know where they're planning on going on all of this stuff, but have your popcorn ready and watch as we go down the road on. Oh, another thing that I had mentioned in the time before you popped in, I alluded to Ian Chen's abortive debate with Kent Hovind that turned into a debate with Otangelo. And of course, Ian has pointed out that he's really not interested in debating creationists, but he is happy to make fun of them.
Oh my gosh, those are the funniest debates I've ever seen, the ones that he does.
Oh, yeah, because he humors the pomposity of the creationist. And because he had intended to be debating Kent Hovind on the issue of evolution versus creationism, which the social effect, he was aiming at it at that angle and kind of skewering on the issue of the abuse of minors and all that that pops up, that is and of sexual abuse and all of that might be striking rather close to home on there. But with Otangelo popping into the field, now it was a very different kettle of fish. Otangelo basically repeated all the tropes that you would find at the Discovery Institute, Darwin a racist, and all of that stuff, and the pernicious effect of it, blah, 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 blah. Which, incidentally, that's another little topic that I was doing as a follow-up, because at one point, Otangelo just name-dropped St. Basil, founding churches, hospitals in the Christian world. And this was part of that trope that all the good things of life come from Christianity and the Bible, and all of the people that don't believe that way have a problem on it. And so I decided to do some follow-up research on the evolution of hospitals in various places on the planet, and how much of it was doing in the Christian world and how much of it was doing elsewhere, like Khmer, Cambodia. And a lot of things were going on in there. One little sidebar that popped up that I haven't really been thinking of is that the disestablishment of the monasteries by the Tudors had an impact on the hospitals, because they no longer had any money to make out of it. and so there was a drop off, and it had to be finally replaced by Protestant ones over the years. And so there's a bit of a speed bump on that kind of a thing. But it is a fair thing to say that there was a increasing tradition, at least from the early years of the imperial church on, to found hospitals where people could just come in out of nowhere and be treated, and that was a new innovation. And it's a thing that needs to be acknowledged and discussed. But boy, Otangelo can't resist turning it into like it's all popping out of thin air, that there had in fact been a tradition of varying levels of this in the Greco-Roman world. The Roman army had a whole network of military hospitals for their wounded. And so the idea that what you did, the variation that the Catholics added, or the Byzantines would be Orthodox, is the idea that you would be opening things up for more poor people. And the charity idea, it can be argued in general evolution terms as how religions evolve, is that the ones that tend to survive are ones that do kind of pay attention to treating the poor at some stage or others.
I mean,
they'll have varying ways of doing it, but
the large swaths of common people, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you don't, your marketing drops off because they die.
Right.
And so
yeah, exactly.
There's a selection pressure for that. That you have to pay attention to some of it, and certainly from conviction on that aspect. But poor Otangelo tries to cram everything into that framework. Of course, he accepts the Shroud of Turin as authentic, and so
of course he does. Of course he does.
Yes. So there's an awful lot of background material on that. Well, my gosh, we managed to do a whole program, and we're past an hour on there.
We did it.
I had given a piece. Yeah, we did it. Yes, the connections were good. I was giving people an advice before you came in on the insect matter, is that anybody that has, there were quite a few in the feed originally, that are insect buffs. And I was saying that insects are an area that creationists don't deal with much. And so
no, good Lord,
anybody
no.
So anybody who's an insect buff should want to pay attention to that and look and see how much of taxa get discussed in the creationism issue. And it is, in fact, a division point. Yeah, because they can't quite make up their mind as to whether they should put insects on the R. So which ones?
I mean, RJ, it's quite simple. How many kinds of collembolans are there?
Yeah, there we go. Simple question, and work your way. And those 20,000 species of ants, how many of them are there? How many kinds are there?
50,000 species of beetle?
Now, if somebody in the creationism movement could get a revelation from God as to what the hell the metapleural gland does, and that would be an interesting prediction to work out, because at the moment nobody knows what the hell they do.
250,000 species of nematodes out there also,
Yes, yes, busy little, of which connecting up back to our original concepts there, they can go
Mm-hmm.
into estivation mode,
There
and
you go.
there's an evolutionary discussion of all of that in the Frezal and Felix 2015 paper. So that'll complete all the little things. Anyway, everybody have a happy Christmas and a Merry New Year and a happy Hanukkah and a
Yay!
frenzied Kwanzaa and a solstice celebration, and
Festivus.
yes, yes, and go out to Stonehenge and watch the sunrise and all that kind of stuff. Let's cover all the bases here. And meanwhile, um, I have gotten my booster shot, and a public citizen that I am, and let's continue to be reasonable and intelligent and curious, and not heed the advice of people. Can we go with
Absolutely.
that? Yeah. Okay. And so we hopefully will be able to have another show then next week where we will go into more detail on Mr. Booma and his ins and outs. Oh, yeah, yeah. Fortunately, all this stuff is linkable, so it's all public access stuff, and it's funky fun to look through. And see you kids all next week. Everybody have. Oh, hi, Ian, the official Ian Chen. Yes, we were discussing. And happy Festivus to all. We were having a little nod to your interaction with Otangelo, and keep up the snark. So till next week, kids, and everybody stay safe. We're ending the stream.